If you're a small business owner, there's a pretty good chance you're missing a key person from your team. You might think you need a CPA or an accountant, but there's a pretty good chance you don't actually know what those people do. And as a result of that, you could end up picking the wrong person at the wrong time, and it could cost you thousands. In today's video, we're going to go over the 6 accounting roles that you will eventually need to have in your business. My name is James Masotti. I'm the owner of Our Team Accounting, and on this channel, I am passionate about helping entrepreneurs achieve their personal and professional goals through intentional financial decision-making. Let's hop right into the video. Okay, so first, most business owners don't like paying taxes, but at the end of the day, no matter how small your business is, if you're based in the United States, currently, you're gonna have to pay taxes, which is why the first role that you need to have as a small business owner is a tax preparer. So what exactly does a tax preparer do? Well, to be honest, it's kind of right in the name. They just prepare your taxes. So when you think about tax preparation, you might have like the H&R block, stuff kind of come to your mind. And that's really the bottom line. They're filling out the forms that ultimately get submitted into the IRS or to the state or things along those lines. They may provide some questions to figure out if you're eligible for certain deductions and things along those lines. And they can sometimes help with your business returns and your personal returns. But at the end of the day, they're just helping prepare the submission of your taxes. So why is it important to have a tax preparer? Having a tax preparer is ultimately about making sure that you meet the appropriate deadlines for filing your federal, state, and local taxes. A good tax preparer is going to make sure that you're hitting those deadlines, taking advantage of the most obvious deductions, making sure that you avoid penalties, and that you're making any quarterly payments that you need to make on time to avoid any fees and fines that may be associated with missing those. However, good tax preparers are in high demand. There are more folks retiring every year than there are new graduates coming out, and the tax code is only getting more complicated. As a result, there are many tax preparers that end up being overworked, especially because of how tight the tax window is, which results in, if you're a business owner who's not organized, missing tax deadlines and needing to file extensions and potentially pay penalties if you're not paying your payments on time. So figuring out where you are in the tax prep process and staying on top of great communication is going to be critical for somebody in this particular role. So what is it ultimately going to cost you to hire a tax preparer? Well, on the lower end of things, it could start out at a few $100s a month. And from there, it's really going to go up into thousands of dollars a month as your return gets more complicated, both from a business structure standpoint and your personal, whether you have investors that you have to provide tax documents to, and a whole host of other situations. As a business owner, you're going to have to file your taxes, right? So the second thing that you're going to need in order to help facilitate filing your taxes is bookkeeping. Now, early on, most business owners are probably doing their own bookkeeping. It's very common to do that. However, at some point, if that's not your strong suit, which for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's not, you're gonna be looking to outsource your bookkeeping. Bookkeeping is basically the process of taking what is in what we oftentimes call the bank feed from your QuickBooks or Xero or any number of other accounting platforms, and taking all the transactions that are coming through from your bank statements and your credit cards and making sure that they get coded to the appropriate categories, what we would call GL accounts that tie into your chart of accounts. And from there, that's really what builds out your financial statements. There's transactions that are going to hit your profit and loss, your income statement. There's transactions that are going to hit your balance sheet. And bookkeeping is the process of making sure that everything is going into the right places. Now, you can kind of go a little bit of a step further into what might be called accounting. And this is the broad umbrella under which everything goes from an accounting and using the term accountant, and technically anybody with an accounting degree or who is doing the function of accounting can be an accountant, regardless of what kind of work they're doing. And so this is one of those areas where the terminology gets really confusing. Specifically though, what accounting really kind of means is going a little bit further from just the bookkeeping part. So why is having bookkeeping important? First and foremost, you need to have your financials figured out in order to be able to file your taxes. So again, every business is ultimately going to have something that they're doing, even if it's on a basic spreadsheet, so they can file their taxes. But beyond that, this is what's going to tell you how healthy your business is. The financial statements that you have is no different than when, as a human, we go to our general practitioner doctor and we go in for a physical. We're getting a baseline assessment of what is the health that we're in. They're checking our blood pressure, they're checking our heart rate and things along those lines. And those are the things that your bookkeeping and the accounting and your financial statements ultimately do for your business as well. As a result of how important this really is, having somebody who has an acute eye for detail is really important. You really need to make sure that everything ties out, that at the end of the month, you're able to reconcile everything. And having appropriate and accurate financial data is going to make sure that you have everything else that comes after it is working and in place. So what is it ultimately going to cost to have your bookkeeping done? Well, you can do it yourself. You could have a spouse or a friend or family member volunteer to help you do it. If you ultimately want to hire somebody, there are a ton of resources where you can get folks overseas as cheap as a few dollars per hour, $4 or $5 per hour. But really, when you do that, you have to understand that there's going to be a lot that you might have to train those folks on. So from there, you're potentially looking at hiring somebody part-time domestically here in the US, where that could be, anywhere from $10 to $20 an hour. As you get to the point where you are hiring, somebody full-time, you could start paying them upwards of $50,000+ a year. And if you ultimately decide you want to outsource that, you could be looking at fees anywhere from $30 an hour all the way up to $100+ an hour, with many firms actually offering fixed rate bookkeeping packages as well. Once you've got your bookkeeping handled, you're probably progressing into a stage where you're starting to think about growing your business. Whether you're growing it as a solo practitioner and starting to actually pay yourself more, or you're thinking now is the time when I'm going to start hiring people. You're probably transitioning into the stage where you need payroll. Payroll is an interesting topic because even in corporate America, payroll tends to sit in one of two seats, either under the finance and accounting umbrella or under the HR umbrella. And so regardless of where you think about it, at the end of the day, you're going to need to pay folks. And when you pay them, you're going to need to record the transactions onto your general ledger. And you're going to need to break out your wages, different from your taxes, different from your health benefits. And so there's always going to be an element of payroll that ties into your accounting. But at the end of the day, why do you ultimately need payroll, right? You have to pay your people. This isn't something that you want to mess around with. You're very quickly going to lose your employees if you mess up their pay. It's one of the areas that there's not a lot of forgiveness for. That being said, there's also not a lot of forgiveness from the government. They want to get their taxes being collected. In most states, you're also going to need to have workers' compensation insurance. They want to make sure the employees are protected. There's a lot of different things, whether you're offering benefits, that all kind of fall under the umbrella of payroll, that you're going to need to make sure that you're in compliance from a lot of different laws. And payroll is just the starting place for making sure that you're doing that. In addition to offering pay to your employees, you may also be offering other sort of fringe benefits, things like paid time off or sick leave. And depending on what state you're in, some of these things may be legal requirements that you offer. And in some states, there's even a difference between sick time and paid time off and what you legally can and can't do with those things. And so having somebody who knows and understands all of that to make sure that, again, you're staying out of trouble is going to be really critically important in that stage of growth when you're bringing on new team members. So now that we're bringing on payroll, what is that ultimately going to cost you? Well, again, you can run payroll by yourself. Again, I really don't recommend that you do that for all of the compliance reasons that we mentioned. They can get really expensive if you miss one of those. As a matter of fact, I missed one in my own business when I first started, and it cost me a $1,500 fine because I missed having coverage for an employee who honestly ended up only working for me for 2 months. So it's really important to make sure that you are doing these things correctly with professionals who know how to do them. So when you think about hiring those professionals, what ultimately is it going to take? At the bare minimum, you can use some online resources for as cheap as $50 a month, if you're just starting out with yourself. From there, it's usually going to scale either based on the number of employees you have or how frequently it is that you're running payroll and processing that. From there, it's also going to matter whether you're working with a specific payroll company, the large companies, there's local companies. as well as whether or not you ultimately outsource it to an HR organization and keep that separate from your accounting, where they're managing all of your employee benefits and making sure that you're compliant from policies and procedures and a whole host of other things. Where payroll gets bundled in, you can start looking at packages that start going into the thousands of dollars. So now that we've gone ahead and we've paid all of our employees, we're thinking to ourselves, what's next? Well, we're finally getting to the point where we've got our accounting taken care of and we've got our employees getting paid. And so you're thinking man, I really need to start saving on my taxes. And that's when you need to think about hiring a tax strategist or a tax planner. And the reason this is broken out separately from tax preparation is it's honestly an entirely separate function. Not every person who does tax prep is honestly suited for doing the tax strategy and the tax planning. There are people who are really strong at tax planning and tax strategy that honestly don't want to deal with the compliance of filling in all of the forms and dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, because that requires a whole different level of detailed analysis. And so when we think about that tax planning and tax strategy, that's really about the big picture, diving in and looking at what's actually going on in your business and what rules are available in the over 1,600 pages of the IRS tax code, not to mention the state and local tax codes as well, that you might be able to take advantage of in order to optimize your business and pay the least amount of taxes possible. Why is tax planning and tax strategy really all that important? Well, there's the obvious answer of I want to save money on taxes. But sometimes that's not actually what you want to do. And hear me out on that. The reason I say that is, for example, if you're trying to plan to go buy a house in the near future, you need to actually show positive income on your tax returns because they're going to ask for copies of that. And if you don't make enough money, then you're not going to qualify for a mortgage to be able to buy a house. And so there's always this strategy of needing to look out longer term and be like, what is it that we want to do for the next couple of years to make sure that we're properly taking advantage of our tax plans and tax strategies? You also don't want to fall into the traps where sometimes people will think oh, I don't want to pay the government any money more than I have to. And so what they do is they actually will spend more to increase the number of expenses that they have. And if you have no profit, then as a business, you don't pay taxes because businesses are paying their taxes on their net income rather than on their gross income like we do as individual taxpayers. And so you also got to be careful that you're not bleeding your company dry just to pay the least amount of taxes possible. And so understanding how to plan and prioritize those things over the right time horizon is critically important. So what is a good tax strategy and tax plan ultimately going to cost you? Well, this is one of those areas where it's really going to depend. You should probably plan to pay at least several hundreds of dollars, but probably into the thousands of dollars for a really good tax plan and tax strategy. And here's the catch though. Once you get this stuff done right, you have to think about the compounding effects that implementing those strategies are going to have over the long term. So when somebody saves you $10,000 or $20,000 on your taxes, it's oftentimes not just for 1 year unless you're taking advantage of a specific benefit to you. But what it can do is actually compound over time. So when you pay somebody a few $1,000s for a really good, robust tax plan and tax strategy, oftentimes the benefits of that are going to follow you for years and decades that you are in business. So when you see the price tag of what hiring somebody can be, don't shy away from that, because just understand whether they're one-time or reoccurring savings, and then really think about that long-term return on your investment. So now that we've talked about having that tax strategy, we're really thinking to yourself now, I'm a business owner, I'm running around, I'm crazy, I got to run my company, I'm trying to do my bookkeeping and my payroll, and now I've got this tax strategy. What am I doing? How do I keep this all organized, right? And so the answer to that ultimately is you hire a fractional CFO. Where fractional CFOs are going to be different than your accountant and bookkeeper is the fact that they're generally going to be more forward looking on things rather than just being backwards looking. So they're going to help you put together budgets. They're going to help you look at cash flow projections. They're going to make sure that your chart of accounts is structured in a way that is supportive of the tax strategy that you've got in place. They're going to work with your tax strategist and provide them updates throughout the year, whether things are tracking to what the plan was. So there's a big difference where you might have put in your budget and talked to your tax strategist about the fact that hey, I want my business to do $2 million. That's what we're projecting this year. But if instead it's going to do 1.5 or 2.3, then what needs to change in things, right? Sometimes these strategies are only available at certain income limits and income thresholds, or you might only be eligible over a certain dollar amount or below a certain dollar amount for certain credits and things along those lines. So you want to make sure that you're having somebody who's actively monitoring all of those things to not only make sure that you have a plan for going forward, but that it's managing all of those critical components. And that's really where a fractional CFO can come in handy. So in addition to all of that, there's also kind of this advisory element of things. And where that can kind of come in is if you're planning to do a merger or an acquisition, if you're thinking about bringing on investors, or if you're thinking about going public, having a fractional CFO is somebody who's really going to kind of help navigate all of those really deep financial discussions that are going to need to happen as part of all of that, and make sure that your business is really positioned and prepared for going through those things. So with that in mind, what's it going to cost to hire a fractional CFO? You're probably looking at, if you're paying somebody on an hourly basis, $200 an hour up to closer to $500 an hour. And most engagements at this point are also available on a retainer basis, where you're probably looking at somewhere between $2,000 and $10,000 a month. And really, all of that is going to depend on the size, the complexity, the scope of the engagement. Are they just meeting with you monthly or quarterly? Are they doing in-depth reviews? Are you meeting every single week? Really, how much are they being a part of your business versus just somebody that you're able to kind of call on a periodic basis? So these are folks who can really help you do a lot of things as you're really getting into those growth stages in your business. So now that we've talked about the growth that you've experienced in your business, and you've got a fractional CFO in place to help coordinate a lot of different things, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, I'm all good. I'm done. I've built out my entire accounting team. And for the majority of business owners, that's probably correct. But there is one more role I want to talk about, and that is the role of an auditor. And what an auditor really is somebody who's going to double check and investigate whether or not the financial statements that are provided are truthful and accurate. And where an auditor is going to ultimately come into play is, this is big for publicly traded companies, for nonprofits. They're required to have their financial statements audited. But as a private company, you may also want to consider having your books audited. If you're using an outside accounting company, or if you have an in-house person, maybe you've grown and you've brought a bookkeeper in-house, but you're still not an accountant, and white collar crimes, one of the most popular ones of those is embezzlement from internal folks. And so if you have this ability to get an audit done, it can really bring peace of mind that your folks, as much as you want to trust them, really are doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing. So you might be thinking to yourself, as a private company though, why would I need to have my books audited? And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is that white collar crimes are still prevalent out there. And if you've brought your bookkeeping in-house, or if you are utilizing a third party to do your accounts payable, sometimes it might just be peace of mind every couple of years or on whatever frequency, if things just don't sit right with you, to have an audit done on your books. You might also want to be doing an audit if you're thinking about selling your company, or if you're thinking about going public, because at the end of the day, all of that is going to really benefit you in terms of making sure you've got the right pricing, that you've got the right alignment with the seller. It shows a good faith if you've already had an audit done. And just make sure that you're on the same page and that there aren't going to be a ton of surprises as you go through the whole process of whether it's going public or going through a sale. That would be beneficial. So this is not a role that you're typically going to hire full time. It really is something that you're going to use on an ad hoc basis. And that's really the reason why this is like an extra kind of last step. All the other roles are things that you'll eventually want to build into and have those folks be a permanent fixture in your overall team structure. An auditor is something that you're only going to use when you need them. So what is an auditor going to cost you? If you decide that you do want to go ahead and get an audit done, it's going to cost you probably a few $100s an hour to have an audit done. Depending on the scope of the audit, you may be able to negotiate for a fixed rate fee for having your audit completed and have a written statement and proposal basically put together in terms of like what they found and their opinion of what the financial health of your particular organization is. So just be aware, like anything else, the scope is going to help dictate what the ultimate cost ends up being, whether you're paying on an hourly rate or on a fixed cost basis. So now that we've talked about those 6 particular roles, what I really want to also focus on is when you're evaluating somebody, the important thing to understand with all of these different roles is even though they all fall under accounting, it's no different than a lot of other areas that have specializations, right? Not every general practitioner doctor is doing brain surgeries or being a foot doctor or sports medicine or anything along those lines, even though they all ultimately have the same degree. And so the important thing to realize is that accounting is no different. The folks who are going to be really good at doing your tax prep might be terrible at doing bookkeeping. And folks who are doing your bookkeeping might make terrible tax planning tax strategists. Now, it's not to say that there aren't folks who can do some of these things or all of these things decently well, but you really also want to think about like that focus and specialization that comes from having one particular skill set mastered versus just being a generalist in all things. When you're starting off small, maybe you can go ahead and get away with that generalist person, but as you grow and you scale, you may outgrow that person. And so a lot of these thoughts in terms of like, what person do I need and when do I need them is going to be what stage of your business are you? Are you trying to replace somebody that you outgrew? Are you looking to add on? And it's very possible that I've heard people say things like, oh, I've outgrown my CPA. And a lot of times when you ask them why, it's because they need somebody who can give them the tax strategy and the tax advisement. And their person doing their tax prep might actually be fine. They're great at managing the details and filing their tax returns. It just means you need a different player on your team now that you have to add on to. Some folks that do tax prep and strategy might do the tax returns, but a lot of them don't want to do the tedious details of filling in tax forms. And so they don't do that work. And so just knowing and understanding that the skill sets and the interests and what those folks all want to be doing is going to be very different. And so you don't need one person, and you probably are not going to end up with one person who's going to provide you all these services. So when you say that to somebody that I'm looking for a CPA or I'm looking for an accountant, I really want you to keep in mind all 6 of these different roles and think about what is the actual work that you need done, and instead ask folks for referrals on that. Now that you have a clear picture on what the 6 roles are, we're going to dive deeper into each one of these in our upcoming videos. The next video that we're going to be going over is the one that everybody needs, tax prep. So click on the video over here and we will see you there.